And now for calculating limits using the laws of limits. Well, one thing is, if you have this limit of f of x as x approaches a, first try to substitute that number a into whatever the function is. And if you get an actual number, you're done. If it says 5/7, you're done. That's the answer. If you get division by 0, then quite often what you need to do is use algebra. And that's what we're going to do quite a few examples of right here. So for example number 1, the limit as x approaches 4, and with these examples I'm going to try and go over every possibility, or at least almost every possibility, and we're going to go from the easiest to the medium to the more difficult. This would be one of the easier ones. So you can see if you substitute a 4, this would be 16 minus 16, and this would be 4 minus 4. So that's 0 divided by 0. So we need to do some algebra. And in this case, the algebra is pretty straightforward, and that is factor the top. It'll factor as x minus 4 times x plus 4. And then after that, this x minus 4 and this x minus 4 can cancel. And right there is where we just canceled the 0 divided by 0. So now when you substitute a 4 in, it's just going to say 4 plus 4. So the answer is 8. Now example number 2 is similar, at least as far as the algebra and the work, but the result is a little bit different. So basically, what if these were switched? What if it had x minus 3 on the top and x squared minus 9 on the bottom? So the limit as x approaches 3, if you substitute that in, this will be 0, this will be 0. So again, we need to do algebra. So this time it's the denominator that gets factored. It's going to be x minus 3 times x plus 3. And then the x minus 3 on the bottom and the x minus 3 on the top cancel, in which case we no longer have division by 0. So that means at that point, when you no longer have division by 0, you can take this 3 and substitute it in. So then this one turns out to be a fraction. Just make sure that when you cancel right here, you leave a 1 on the top, so it's 1/6. Then for example number 3, how about the limit as x approaches 100, and then the top has the square root of x minus 10 over x minus 10. So of course, oops, this bottom part's supposed to say x minus 100. So of course, if you substitute 100 in, this is going to be 10 minus 10. This is going to be 100 minus 100. So that means division by 0, we need to do algebra. So the algebra that we're going to do is use the conjugate of this. The reason for that is when you multiply by the conjugate, it gets rid of the square root. So the conjugate means take the square root of x and then use a plus instead of a minus. And if this would have been a plus, I would have used a minus right here. And if you multiply the top by it, then you need to multiply the bottom by the exact same thing. And then it's going to say the limit as x approaches 100 and multiply out the top. So there's going to be the square root of x times the square root of x. That will just be x. One good thing about conjugates is the middle terms are going to cancel, because when you multiply the 10 and the radical x, that's a positive 10 radical x. And when you multiply these two, that's going to be negative 10 radical x. So the middle terms cancel. Then there would be the last one times the last one, so that's going to be minus 100. And then the good news is, do not multiply out the bottom, because the whole goal is this is what's causing division by 0, so I want this to cancel. So if you just leave it in parentheses, then the x minus 100 and the x minus 100 will cancel. It leaves a 1 on top. And then you can substitute the number 100, so it's going to be 1 over the square root of 100 plus a 10. And then this would be 10 plus 10. So the final answer is 1/20. Now, we could be checking our answer on each and every one of these, but I feel pretty confident. Although I just want to show you, if you want to check your answer, you can go like this. Go back to the original problem and you graph it. So go to y equals, the numerator needs to be in parentheses. It's got the square root of x minus 10, and then divided by x minus 100. And now we need to go out to 100, so I need to change the window. So going from like 0 to 200, that'll put 100 right in the middle. And the answer we got is very small. This is 0.05. So I'll have it go from 0 to a 0.10. And then that way my 0.05 will be right in the middle. And then graph, and you can see there goes the function. It's got a little hole in it right here when x equals 100. So that is saying there's a hole in the graph. But if you take a number that's very close to 100, like 100.001, then it says that your answer should be 0.05. And 1/20 is equal to 0.05. So I'm confident I got that one right. Then moving on to the next type of example, number 4. What's the limit? And the variable doesn't have to be x. I'm going to use h. So what about this limit? So h is going to 0, which of course causes division by 0. That means we somehow need to do some algebra and have this h cancel. The algebra we do on this one is go ahead and multiply this out. So when you square a binomial, you need to square the first thing, so that's going to be 5 squared is 25. Then you multiply these two things, which is a 5h, and you double that result, that's a 10h, so plus 10h. And then you square this last component right here, so it's going to be h squared. And then there was also a minus 25, and the whole thing was divided by h. Then this positive 25 and this negative 25 could cancel. Once those have canceled, notice that this has an h and this has an h. So on the numerator, I could factor out an h. So if you factor out an h, right here it's just going to leave 10, and right here it's going to leave plus an h. And at the very beginning I said this thing was causing division by 0. Well, we just got rid of that division by 0. So all that's left is 10 plus h. And because h is becoming a 0, that means 10 plus 0, so the answer is 10. Now let's try a different one. So like I said, I'm trying to cover every possibility. The next one is, what if it has compound fractions? So the whole thing is a fraction, and then it's got fractions within that fraction. So if x is approaching -7 and this becomes a -7, that means you've got division by 0. So once again, do algebra. Now there's several ways that you could do this, but the easiest way, I believe, is you look at the denominators, you find the least common denominator. So that would be 7x. And then multiply the top by 7x and multiply the bottom by 7x. So on the top, when you distribute this 7x to this 1/7, then the 7's are going to cancel. All it leaves is x. When you distribute it to this fraction, the x on the bottom and the x on the top will cancel, so all that leaves is +7. And on the bottom, you do not need to multiply it out. So an x plus 7 and a 7 plus x are the exact same thing. Just like 2 plus 3 and 3 plus 2, they both equal the same thing. So that means that these can cancel, leaving a 1 on top. And then replace x with a -7. And the final answer is, it is -1/49. Remember, with fractions, you can put the negative on the bottom, in the middle, or on the top. They're all the same thing. Then for example number 6, how about the limit as h goes to 0, and it's got x plus h cubed minus x cubed over h. So as with all the other ones, this one has division by 0, so we need to do algebra. So what I think we should do is multiply this out and then simplify the top. So what I think I'm going to do is get some scratch paper and just do this part on the scratch paper. So it means x plus h times an x plus h times another x plus h. And then pick 2 of them and multiply those out. So there would be x times x, so there's x squared. There would be x times h and another x times h. So there's 2 of them that have x times h. And there would be h times h, so that's h squared. Now all of that still needs to be multiplied with x plus h. So first I'm going to distribute the x. So this gets multiplied with x, so that's x cubed. This gets multiplied with x, so that's plus 2x squared h. And then distribute it to the last term, so that's going to be x times h squared. Then distribute the h. So plus h gets multiplied with x squared. Now distribute it to this term, so it's going to be 2x and h squared. And then ultimately, h times h squared is h cubed. And then I should combine like terms. Like, for example, this has x squared and h. This also has x squared and h. So this has nobody to combine with, so that's just x cubed. Then there's 2 of them plus 1 more that have x squared h. So there's 3 of them that have x squared h. Next up, this has x and h squared, and this also has x and h squared. So we can combine those, which makes a total of 3 that have x and h squared. And then finally, the h cubed. Okay, now take that from the scratch paper and transfer it to right here. So it's still going to say the limit as h approaches 0. Then I'm going to need some space. So our result was, if I can get them both on screen, our result was this. So it's got x cubed plus 3x squared h plus 3x h squared plus h cubed. Okay, then there's also this minus x cubed, and the whole thing is divided by h. And then start reducing. There's a positive x cubed, and then there's minus x cubed, so those two cancel each other out. And then this has h, this has an h, and this has an h. So from what's left, we could factor out an h. So when you factor out an h, this one is going to have 3x squared. This one will have 3x times a single h. And this one will have h squared. And then finally, the reason for doing all of that algebra. The reason is this was causing division by 0, but right now it just got canceled. And then substitute that h becomes a 0. So this doesn't have an h, so it just stays 3x squared. And then this one would be 3x times 0, so that's 0. And this one would be 0 squared, so that's 0. So the final answer is 3x squared. So there's times when you find limits and you get an actual number, and there's times when you get a function. Okay, then let's try example number 7. What's the limit as x approaches negative 2, and then the function is x cubed plus 8 over x plus 2. And it should be no surprise that this one is going to have division by 0. So that means we need to do algebra. For this one, there's two ways to do it. One is you can factor this if you remember the formula for factoring the sum of cubes. And it goes like this, in case you don't remember it from algebra. If you have the sum of two cubes, that could be factored as the a plus b, and then a squared minus ab plus b squared. So when this is a plus, the first one stays plus. And then for this one, it changes to a minus. Now if this said a cubed minus b cubed, the only difference would be this would be a minus, and then this would be a plus. Now in this case, the a and the b. So what got cubed? Here an x got cubed, and here a 2 got cubed. So this is going to be x, and this is going to be 2. So the top gets factored as x plus 2, and then the x gets squared, and then you minus the 2 times the x, and then you square the 2, which will be 4. And as has happened in each and every one of these, this thing which was causing division by 0 gets cancelled. Then we can substitute the negative 2. So the first one is going to say negative 2 gets squared minus 2 times negative 2 plus a 4. When you square a negative, that's a positive. So that's a positive 4. This one will be negative times negative, so that's a positive. And then 3 4s in a row equals 12. And I haven't checked one of my answers for a while, so I think I'll do that. So first you graph it. Make sure you start with the original problem, not this, but the original problem. So the original problem is x is cubed plus an 8. Uh-oh. What happened is, once I get to that point, it says use the right arrow. I forgot to use the right arrow. Then plus 8. And then it gets divided by x plus 2. And we're talking about when x is a negative 2, so I need to adjust the window. And if I go from like negative 5 to 0, then that will definitely include negative 2. And the answer is 12, so I need this to go up to at least 12. I'm going to go to 15. And then graph. Okay, so here's negative 2, and then this would be where the answer is supposed to be. So if I trace and put negative 2, it says blank because of division by 0. Then put something close to negative 2, negative 1.9999. And then it should say that the y is approximately 12. And it says it's 11.9999 or 999. So it seems like my answer 12 is correct. And then let's do one more. So for example number 8, let's try a challenging one. The limit as h approaches 0, 3 over h and the square root of 9 plus h, and then minus 1 over h. So once again, each one of these is going to have division by 0 because of this. So we need to do algebra. Well, when you have two fractions, if you're going to add them or subtract them, you need a common denominator. The common denominator would be h times the square root of 9 plus h. This one is missing the square root of 9 plus h. So you need to multiply on the top and the bottom by the square root of 9 plus h. Now we could write this as one fraction. So in the numerator, it'll have 3 minus this square root. The denominator will be h and then square root of 9 plus h. Now this is the thing that's causing division by 0, so we need to keep going with the algebra until it cancels, like it's done in every other example. Well, the next thing to do is, for this one, use the conjugate. So that's going to be 3 plus the square root of 9 plus h. So multiply the top by 3 plus the square root of 9 plus h, and multiply the bottom by 3 plus the square root of 9 plus h. Now for the denominator, do not multiply it out. Just copy and paste. The reason is we want this thing to cancel, so it's better if it's in factored form. That way later, we can just cancel it. And then for the conjugate, like I mentioned earlier, the middle terms are going to cancel, so all you need is the first one times the first one. 3 times 3 would be 9. And then the last one times the last one. Well, because it's the radical times itself, it leaves just 9 plus h. And then there's the minus sign. Now, if I went on to the next step, I would get the wrong answer, because this negative is applying to this whole thing. So I have to have this negative apply to the whole thing, 9 plus h. Okay, now I'm going to get the right answer. So on the top, we're going to have 9 minus 9. Those will cancel. And then this negative needs to apply to the h. So there's going to be 9 minus 9. Those cancel. And then negative h. And then just copy and paste the bottom part. Okay, now we're almost done. So finally, after all of that algebra, it pays off because finally this h will cancel this h, leaving a negative 1 on the top. So it leaves negative 1 on the top. And after this is canceled, you can substitute that h becomes a 0. So this part will be the square root of 9 plus 0. And then there will be 3 plus the square root of 9 plus 0. This is going to be the square root of 9, so that's a 3. This is also going to be a 3, and 3 plus 3 is 6. So inside the parentheses, this is 3 plus 3, so that's 6. And this becomes a 3, and 3 times 6 is 18. So the final answer is negative 1/18. All right, I'll talk to you again in the next section. See you there.